All right. Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning. My name's Megan Beckley. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I am very excited to be here for our fifth and final part in our Inclusion by Instinct series. We're really excited today to have a wonderful panel of speakers representing the Women Plus community as our final part in our series this morning. And I'm excited to introduce our panelists here in just a moment. But before we do that, just a couple of quick announcements. So first, I wanted to give a shout out and a thank you to both of our presenting sponsors for Baldwin Wallace University and Cuyahoga Community College. I want to thank them very much for sponsoring the series and allowing us to keep this free and open to all. We're very thankful for their support. And also just want to mention as we go through the webinar today, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A function. If you'd like to ask something anonymously, which a lot of attendees have done, please also feel free to do that. You can drop it in the chat and just send it directly to me as the host, and I am more than happy to ask that on your behalf, so that if there's a question you're a little bit like, oh, I don't want to ask this live, go ahead and just drop it in the chat, and I'd be happy to just ask it on behalf of any of our attendees this morning. So that should be an option for you to do in the chat feature. All right, with that, let's go ahead and get rolling. I want to start by just very briefly introducing our panelists for this morning, and then I'm going to allow them all to talk a little bit more about themselves. But this morning, I am very pleased to welcome three wonderful panelists who are going to tell us a little bit more about the Women Plus community. So first, we have Barbara Daniel. She is the publisher and editor for the Cleveland Women's Journal, and she's also the immediate past president of NAWBO, and I will let her tell you what that is and that wonderful acronym stands for. We also have Danny Esperanza, who is the recent president of the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. So near and dear to my heart as Bobcat. So I want to thank you for being here this morning, all the way from beautiful Athens, Ohio. And finally, we have Cindy Torres-Essel, who is the Chief People Officer for Heinens. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and let y'all introduce yourselves to our audience this morning so that you can tell us a little bit about yourselves, your professional background, and a little bit about anything you personally like to share that, sort of your perspective that you bring to the conversation today. So I'll just go in alphabetical order. So Barbara, let's go ahead and start with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Megan. It's my pleasure to be here. NAWBO is the National Association of Women Business Owners, and I'm the immediate past president of the Cleveland chapter. NAWBO was founded based on advocacy because women business owners couldn't even get a loan. For some time, I know for me, when I was a lot younger, I couldn't get a credit card without my husband's signature. I mean, this is the way things operated. The men could do whatever they wanted to do, but women had to really fight for the right. And that is how NAWBO started. So their mission today for advocacy is still protecting women business owners. That's their primary focus. I'm now, as immediate past president, the chair of the DEIB committee. So diversity is the top priority of the national organization. So we've made it our top priority. But what I'm focusing on is inclusion and belonging. Belonging is a term that National added to the DEI. So inclusion is an action and belonging is an outcome. So that's what we're going to be focusing on as a chapter. When I was a young wife and mom, I wanted to be a police officer in Columbus, Ohio. And when I went to take the civil service exam, they said I couldn't take it until the next year because I was a woman. And I said, well, when do you offer it to men? And they said every month. And I thought, well, that's not right. I graduated from a Cleveland public school. I knew what a civil service exam was. So long story short, I was interviewed by a reporter for the Columbus Dispatch. Several women joined. We were on the cover, and a law firm contacted us, and we sued the city of Columbus for discrimination because we were not allowed to take a civil service exam like the men were able to. And it took us 2 years, but we won the lawsuit.
That is quite a journey, it sounds like you were on. Thank you for sharing that, and excited to hear all the immense experience you're going to bring to the discussion today. So thank you for being here. All right, Danny, let's go over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, Megan, for the opportunity to join this panel. I'm very excited about it. As Megan mentioned, I'm most recently the president of the Athens Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm on sabbatical at the moment. The pandemic had me take a deep breath and realign my priorities, which actually feed into the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work that Barbara already mentioned. So I currently am spending my time doing art in my studio and am the JV coach for high school softball. My passion is around connecting people and building leaders. So I spend a lot of time trying to do that. Personally, I grew up kind of around the whole country, mostly Northeast Texas, moved here to Ohio when I was 19, came out as a non-binary person actually about 3 years ago. I am married with a 7-year-old non-binary kiddo and 2 dogs. The perspective I'm bringing here is working hand in hand with local businesses in Southeast Ohio and nonprofits in Southeast Ohio who are hoping to do work around DEIB, and can bring my own personal perspective, but then also the perspectives that I've brought from the other nonprofits I've worked with, like our local chapter PFLAG and Nationwide. So I really look forward to this opportunity to talk to everyone.
Good. Thank you so much for being here. All right, Cindy, let's go over to you.
Well, good morning. Thank you also. I absolutely appreciate being a part of the conversation this morning. I am currently leading the human resources and learning and development efforts at Heinen's, which is a Midwestern grocer. We have 19 stores in the Cleveland, Ohio area and 4 stores in the Chicagoland area in Illinois. And so I've been here, it'll be 7 years on December 8th. My background is not retail, it's not grocery. My background is more legal, work for large law firms in town, as well as some larger corporations like LexisNexis, worked for KeyBank for a period of time, et cetera. This work has been part of what I do for many, many, many years. I was actually thinking about this as I was preparing for the discussion. I mean, we were doing work around this when I was a resident assistant in college at Baldwin Wallace a long time ago, longer than I would like, I guess, right? And so I'm really excited to be here today and be a part of the conversation. It's certainly a part of the work that I do every day where I am now. And a lot of work that I've done as well in the community. So I have a long history with the boards of Esperanza, the Centers, Rainey Institute, and currently serving on the board of Jumpstart. And Jumpstart is doing a lot of work in the DE&I space around entrepreneurship and allowing people to start their own businesses. So thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today and be a part of the conversation.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. All right. Well, thank y'all for telling everybody who you are. And now we kind of know sort of the perspective you're bringing as we jump into some of the content that we want to go through today. So with that, let us go ahead and dive in. So for all of these sessions, the first kind of area we'd like to start in is just around some of the language and terminology for the community, just to kind of lay a foundation and groundwork so that we're talking a little bit about the language we're going to be using not only in the session today, but just, kind of the language surrounding the community in general, words that people might hear, maybe they're not clear on exactly what they mean. So I want to start there. So what are some of the things that people should kind of keep in mind when it comes to the language surrounding the Women Plus community, or even why we are calling it the Women Plus community? So I am going to go ahead, Danny, I'm going to let you kick things off with this one, and then I have a few more sort of mini questions from there. But let me turn it over to you to get things started.
Sure. Well, women. Wow, you got me good. So to be inclusive to why it might be Women Plus is recognizing that there are other identities and folks that live within identities. Clearly, I need more coffee. That there are more identities outside of a binary construct around the social ideas of gender. And so women is the opposite in some ways of man or men. But there are people who live within that spectrum or just outside of it that are also included that are non-men, if that makes sense. So non-binary is a term that I have taken on to say that I don't live within that binary. And if we can use simple language around like plus or all folks or women plus, it includes people who are gender fluid or who are non-binary, who don't prescribe to those only 2 identities. Or folks who don't follow every societal norm associated with a particular identity. And it's important to include that language so that it is inclusive to all, because if you're not inclusive, you are by default excluding folks and telling them they don't belong or that they're not included at that table.
Thank you. Cindy, I'll go over to you. Anything else you wanted to add?
I think, for me, the main message is that it's not a homogeneous group, right? I'm Latina as well, and it's also the same, right? We're not all from the same place. We're not all with the same culture. We're not all doing the same things. And so to me, the plus piece just means we're all different in many ways, but we're all part of this larger group. So I would just add on to that effect from what Danny said.
Great. Thank you. Barbara, anything else?
No, this was a learning experience for me, and I hadn't heard the term Women Plus before, and oh my gosh, it really, I love the definition and I love the expansion of it and how that can help with inclusion.
Yeah, great. So with regard to language, before we move into our next, some of our next questions here, I wanted to see if we could think a little bit about some of the language that you could be mindful of in areas like job descriptions, if you're looking to hire for different roles, especially as you think about potentially like sales roles or roles that are traditionally more focused toward masculine identifying people. Do you have any tips or recommendations on language pieces that people should keep in mind, where if a woman were to see a certain type of language in a job description, for example, they may be less likely to apply for a job than if a man saw it? So Cindy, given your role, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one.
Sure. So I think first and foremost, we have started using they, their, them. I think that's a big piece. You don't want to see a job description that says he, him, right? And I think that's a basic thing, but I think it's an important thing. And, you want to make sure that it reads to anyone's circumstance. And they're hard to write to that effect. I mean, it's not an easy feat to accomplish this. And I would tell you it's a journey and a work in progress. But you want to try to focus on things, one of the things these days, we all know it's really hard to staff and recruit your businesses. And so we always are focused on making our job descriptions appealing and enticing. And, that means different things to different people. And of course, it means different things maybe to the Women Plus community than it might be to the male community. And so we really try to hone in on the benefits and perks of working, for example, at Heinen's that might be different for women in that community. And so, depending on what that is, right, we try to make it appealing to everybody, whether it's toting things like flexible hours or benefits or experience and skills that you'll gain, training that you'll gain. It's sort of trying to cover that broad, diverse, positives of working at a company so that it's appealing to maybe anyone that's looking. But I do think, the pronoun piece is huge. We've had a lot of great feedback after shifting some of that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I recently sat through a strategic planning with an organization wherein the person leading the strategic planning kept talking about the people at the top of the company, and he kept saying him or this guy or he would. And I raised my hand and said, can women run businesses too? And it didn't even occur to him, that he was just had that sort of bias, that he was assuming that whoever was at the top of an organization would be a man. But you think about even sort of external people that you bring into your organization, if that's the picture they're painting for your staff, it says to your women, well, you're probably never going to make it to the top at this organization. So I think that pronoun piece is really important.
We've even taken that approach internally, right, for employees who already work here with our policies and how we communicate and offer letters and things like that as well, because it's equally as important once you're working somewhere. You need to feel that everything applies to you as well.
Yep. All right,
I
Danny,
would
let's go over to
say,
you.
oh,
Yeah,
were you
you're
coming
up.
to me anyway?
I was. I felt it.
Perfect. So within the chamber, we were doing a lot of really solid pieces around exactly this, remaking job descriptions so that they appealed to the broad piece. And you mentioned specifically about sales, and there were two components that we focused on when we were beginning to rewrite job descriptions, and then also try to share that with our local organization, and realize that there are certain action words There are certain ways that we talk about a job that send signals that are more masculine or more feminine. And so making sure that when we're talking about how the job gets done, that we're using words like collaboration and how those go together, because those are signals to a more feminine audience of the power structure and how they see the workplace in the world, versus a masculine approach, which is very much independent and performance driven. And so making sure that you're using a balance of words so that you're appealing to everyone looking at this job description. So when you're looking at how you're talking about the job makes a difference. Additionally, when we're talking about job descriptions or opportunities in general, when you're listing what your requirements are, it's really important to keep in mind that feminine folks will not apply for a job mostly unless they qualify for like 70% of the listed qualifications, versus their masculine counterparts only need to qualify on their own by about 20%. So recognizing when you're putting of what you need in terms of qualifications, asking yourself, are those requirements or are those nice to haves? And can we apply those in a different way that we can get that same skill set without gatekeeping a specific job description? Because if you think about a lot of feminine folks who may have worked inside the home or have non-traditional work experience, are you gatekeeping those particular skills into a job because you're requiring a particular degree that shows a different skill set, but is not actually required for the job itself? And is there a different way you can ask for that skill?
Thank you. All right, let's go to you.
Danny, what was the percentage for men?
I think men, and I apologize because this is
Oh, that's
not
okay.
one that I had, something around 20 to 25%. When they look at, say, these 5 skills, they only internally say, oh, I've got one of those, I'm qualified.
Yeah.
And women need upwards of 80%, 70 to 80% before they feel justified enough to even apply.
Yeah, I agree. And let's be sure we still understand women are still fighting for rights. Well, I mean, we still are fighting. There are still things, you still hear the first of this and the first of that. So we are still fighting. When I was in corporate and I was a VP and I was on the board of directors and I was the only woman. And when it came time to get coffee or to type up a memo or to do something, it all came to me. It all came to me. It didn't matter my skill set or anybody else in the room. It still goes to the woman because they feel that's who should be doing it. So I think that's still a struggle. I do not have any employees. I, excuse me, have one independent contractor that's been with us for years. So it's my partner and I and our independent contractor. So I haven't had the problem of trying to staff up. But Cindy, I love your comments because it is difficult to rewrite how we used to create job descriptions. And we're working on that. I think we're all on the same journey and a learning process of the best way to do this and the best language to use. So thank you for that. That's very helpful.
All right. Well, Barbara, your comments kind of lead us perfectly right into the next topic I want to touch on, which is this idea of microaggressions. A lot of folks have heard this word, but I don't know that maybe they understand exactly what it means or perhaps exactly how it plays out in a workplace. So the example you've just mentioned of being the only woman in a meeting and being expected to take the notes or get the coffee is very much an example of a microaggression toward women that I'm sure most women have probably encountered at some point in their professional lives in one way or the other. But I wonder if anybody could kind of, explain a little bit more about what that term, sort of what it means, and just some things that people could be mindful of, again, with sort of that unconscious bias that they may have, even women about other women, to just sort of keep in mind. So Cindy, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one.
No, I think you just made a great point about women and other women. And I relate to what Barbara was saying. I mean, I'm a lawyer, but I've been mistaken for the paralegal many times. I've been mistaken for the court reporter several times as well in my past. I've been mistaken for the, executive assistant for someone. Not that any of those things are bad things to be,
Right.
but they were assumptions, right? And to me, the microaggression piece, I think often, really just comes from not knowing. And so I always look at it like not knowing any better, not, need to be more informed, maybe need to be more educated. I've had lots of those experiences as well. I'm often still the only female, executive in the room. Not at Heinen's all the time, but in other, situations that I'm in, union negotiations or different work that I'm doing. And, there are times where, there's a lot of the still like the sweeties and honeys and, things like that. And they're certainly not calling my male counterparts honey, right? Just me. I've been, the one who they're like, oh, can you coordinate the next meeting? Or, oh, lunch is here. Can you go get it? And those sorts of things. And so I've learned over the years, I've had great mentors as well who've taught me how to navigate that. And so I try to pass that on as well to maybe more junior women that are working with me also. I think one of the bigger things that I feel and face that I may be much more attuned to is after I became a mother. It started this, well, we're not going to ask you to come out Saturday because I know you want to be home with your family. We're going to go after work, but I know you want to get home to your family. So go home to your family and don't worry about it. Or, oh, I'm not going to ask you to take this trip because I don't want you to be away from your family. And so that is really where I started to feel a lot. And it's sort of like, well, that's my decision about how I'm navigating my career and my family. And thankfully, I have an amazingly supportive husband who gets it. That's not really your problem, right? For you don't need to navigate for me. I will navigate for myself. And so I do think those things are out there, and I have faced them from other women, not just for men. And so I think we all have this. I'm a big proponent of servant leadership. That's a part of what we talk about a lot here at Heinen's, and try to live that way and give back. And I think, when I think about microaggressions and the things that I've just mentioned that we face, I'm really focused on making sure that people are educated. I'm raising a son that he understands, and that, I'm empowering other women to also speak up and learn to navigate those things and feel enabled and empowered to do it. Because I think, we all have a responsibility to teach those around us and that come behind us. We're not going to turn the tide if we don't keep doing that. So I think this is a very real thing. I think it's frankly more real than overt aggressions in my experience. And I think it's something we all have to keep our radar on and focus on.
I would
Annie,
agree
let's go
with
over
that,
you.
Cindy. Yeah, I echo everything Cindy just said, especially where she ended to say that the microaggressions are very real and likely taking up more than overt aggressions. And they're everything from what was mentioned here to jokes about, hey, hope you can get so-and-so's brownie recipe for the next potluck, or another one of, hey, can you remind me to get my food out of the fridge? And, those are very real things that my wife just experienced in a corporate job that she just took that within the first week. So these, in the sense of microaggressions, are very small, and I use air quotes on purpose. They're very small interactions that talk to an entire larger culture around how folks see and view feminine presenting people and women across the board. And it is a story that then we internalize, that we are only good enough for the brownies, that we are only good enough for the notes, despite the fact that we are highly skilled and qualified to be a lawyer and an executive. And those things compound over time. And it's not just internalizing to the person receiving the microaggressions, but for the people around that table seeing that of, this is the culture that we're building, to then other or less than very qualified people. One thing as a person, that I'm privileged, that I'm masculine presenting. And so I see a lot of microaggressions at play with my other counterparts that are feminine presenting. And the one that aggravates me the most, and the one that I think that together we can try to help overcome, is in meetings, a feminine person, a woman will say something, and then a man will echo it and then get the praise for that, and cutting that and saying, oh, that was a really great thing that so-and-so said, great idea. And I see that myself. If I'm in a meeting, I am taking with a lot more respect initially than some folks who are more feminine presenting, despite the fact that I count myself as a woman plus. I immediately am taken more seriously and automatically assume that I'm in charge. And I've seen that at play at the softball fields. Somebody came up thinking that I was the one that needed to sign the slip for whatever delivery. I was like, no, you need to go talk to the head coach. That's not like, that's a woman right there. Like, that came to me specifically. So you were seeing those at the end of the day of checking those initial assumptions of who's in charge, who has that information and who is the best person for that role.
It is a very subtle exclusion. And you can only imagine how many blonde jokes I have heard all of my life, and that they, continue and continue, and again, you're classifying someone who's blonde that, we're all dumb. And so it's very subtle, just like in the board meeting. So the last time somebody handed me a piece of paper in the board meeting to either copy or to type up or something, I passed it on to one of the men. And then it actually went around the table. It did get a good laugh, but it went around the table. So they at least realized, oh, maybe that's what we're doing. But you're right, it's extremely subtle. And sometimes it doesn't even hit you at the time, but it's real, and it's very destructive.
I think another one that I've heard a lot is, oh, can you take the notes today, right, in meetings? Or can you be the note taker? And I'll say, well, why am I the note? Why me, right? Oh, well, you're a really good note taker. It's like, well, if I take the notes, then I can't participate as much. So I prefer not to take the notes, So finding your way to be able to, speak up and not do something that you don't want to do is really key.
Mhm.
Professionally, of course, but being able to do that's important.
I think that's perfect, Cindy. Actually, I was just going to say, so I just got an anonymous chat here that is asking, do you have any tips for how to handle these situations when they occur to you in the workplace? Because it can be very awkward. And I think a lot of women just go along with it because they're not sure how to handle it, especially if it's a manager or a supervisor who is displaying these microaggressions.
Mhm.
Do y'all have any tips? I know, Cindy, you just mentioned one, but do you have any other tips that you might recommend to women?
I think one thing I would just say is be very conscious of what you are doing. I have watched many women put themselves in that position because I think they're just become accustomed to it over time. And, oh, let me make sure everyone has their lunch. I've worked with someone who, a very senior female executive, very respected, but whenever in a meeting where there was food, she would go pass everyone's lunch out to them, and I used to think like, why is she putting herself in that position? And so I try to be very conscious in those settings of what I am doing. So I think that's the first piece of advice I would give is pay attention to your own behavior over time and monitor that and be sure that you're comfortable with what you're doing and not just doing it because maybe you have before or feel that you should. And again, I think, just to reiterate what I said earlier, I think it's important to maybe practice in advance, right? And be prepared with what you're going to say about, what they're going to ask you to do, right? Whether you can't be the note taker or you can't go run and get the food or, you're not going to make sure we have coffee and water and things like that. And there's certainly plenty of times where those behaviors are appropriate, right? I'm not insinuating they never are. But, I think practicing in advance and having in your mind how you're going to respond or deflect that is important because when you're in the moment, you don't have to think. You've already practiced. It's on the tip of your tongue and you can be ready.
Yeah.
Barbara,
if you don't take some of those tips, then they're going to continue to treat you that way and assume that it's okay with you. And because we are feminine and a lot of us are moms, it's just natural for us to maybe clean up the table, pass out the food. It just comes so natural to us that we don't even realize the message that we're sending. It's just something that we do because we're kind and we're empathetic. But you need to take a tip and somehow shift that so it's not always you that are the target of these requests.
I would, my suggestion would be is one, exactly what Cindy said is practice, Barb, recognizing your own piece around it, but find a co-conspirator. If you know someone else that's around that table, ask for help. Hey, this thing has been coming up. I'm wondering if you can help support me in this moment, or just get a co-conspirator. If it's something that continues to go, you can have a conversation privately with your supervisor or with the person who's running these meetings. If it's in a meeting setting, it's hard to say a specific tip without knowing the context because unfortunately that dictates a lot of this. But taking a piece back and know that there's a few different ways you can go about it. And one of my favorites are bringing it home as a type of way to talk about how these create impact on the person. And right in the middle of a board meeting to say about this note taking is not ideal, but asking for a few minutes at the beginning or the end, or having a conversation with a few folks to really bring home the impact. Because I think at the end of the day, a lot of folks will say, well, that wasn't my intent. But if you can center the impact of how it's affecting you or other people around you, which is where a co-conspirator can help in as well, to kind of echo so that you're not the only squeaky wheel, and tie it back to an overall culture of the whole organization. And that way it doesn't seem so personal, which I've found that some leaders will kind of disregard it, of being like, oh, well, this is a personality clash versus a cultural issue.
Well, there's certainly a reason why they call it unconscious bias. People are doing these things unconsciously, and until somebody points it out and brings it to their conscious, they likely don't even realize they're doing it. But I know I've heard a lot of really great folks that do DE&I work who say, you know, when you know better, you do better. So I think it is important as women that we do point these things out and bring it to people's attention, so that you know, it brings it to the front of their mind, so that next time they, you know, aren't just repeating those behaviors over again. All right, so let's shift a little bit here. So a lot of the folks that were are on the event today and that are going to be, you know, watching this material moving forward are likely either small business owners, or part of small organizations, small nonprofits, etc. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of thinking about women as your customer in that environment. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about some numbers. So some of the statistics on the Women Plus community with regard to their sort of percentage of the population, their buying power, their buying characteristics, things like that. So kind of what are we talking about here with regard to this population as our customer? So Cindy, why don't we start with you? Anything you can sort of touch on with regard to that?
Well, I'm certainly not an expert in this area, but just, you know, based on my research, you know, Women Plus are now more than half of the US population, right? So because of that, they often control and influence a lot of the buying power in their homes. Some of the stats I found were that 70 to 80% of all buying decisions are led by, you know, a Woman Plus member of the household. That actually really stood out to me. This isn't my wheelhouse and not, you know, an area that I am normally focused on, but I had no idea that the power was that high. It certainly plays out in my own personal life, but I didn't realize that was for everybody.
Yeah, it was so funny. I was having a conversation with my husband the other day, and we're thinking about buying a new house, and he was like, how do you get your dad to do so much stuff? And I was like, it's just being a girl. Like sometimes, you know, the women really can, whether it's your husband, your partner, your dad, your brother, you know, your son, women a lot of times are impacting the men around them with regard to spending money. So it's definitely a real thing. Danny, let's go over to you.
Well, I was to that point, a little bit of my professional background. I worked in finance for about 3.5 years, and a lot of marketing within that realm speaks directly to women, recognizing that they're decision makers, whether it's buying a car or buying the groceries, whether it's the house move or the local lessons for the kids. Women are the decision makers behind the scenes. And anecdotally, we've heard that behind every strong man is a strong woman. And that plays out when you're talking about buying power as to how much influence women have in terms of how money is spent everywhere. They're usually the ones within the family setting who are creating the budgets overall, and they're usually the ones that are carrying out the actual payments to things. And when you're talking about your language as a customer, if you're not including them, or if you are purposefully or openly excluding them in communications to attract them as a customer or as a donor or as any sort of contributor, they're going to go somewhere else, and they won't do it loudly. They will do it quietly and just move their money to the next thing. And so if you are not taking care to speak to that demographic, you're going to lose them, and you'll never even know it until it's too late.
Yeah, in 2004, we started the Cleveland Women's Journal magazine because there was no magazine for women, and because women are the buying power. So it seemed like a no-brainer. You know, it's published by women for women. And we're still here today with the same message to empower women through knowledge. And because women are overlooked. I mean, have you ever gone to buy a car by yourself? I mean, my husband used to do all of that before he passed away. But so I went when I was younger, I wanted a standard shift car because I learned how to drive on a standard shift car. And the salesman said, "Oh, you know, I've got to back other cars to get it out. Can you drive a standard shift?" I said, "Well, yes, that's why I'm asking for a standard shift." And I said, "And I won't buy a car without driving it. I have to drive it first." So he was not accommodating. He let me finally pulled it out, let me drive the car, and I bought that car, but not from him. I went to another dealership because that is not how we're to be treated, whether it's in a hardware store or any place else. We are treated differently. That you don't know what you're talking about. So, you know, we're just going to give you what you think you should have, what you should have, not what you want. And it's, I mean, it's still prevalent, maybe not as prevalent as it used to be, but it's still here. And again, that's also very subtle.
I think you're spot on with that. I mean, just a couple of years ago, we were putting new windows in our home. And I had a very, well-known prominent company, when I called to make the appointment, refused to book the appointment because my husband was not going to be home for the appointment. And I confirmed, like, I just want to confirm you won't book this appointment with me for this reason. And obviously did not purchase, a large number of windows from them, and have certainly told many, many people of my experience. So it is still prevalent, which is shocking.
It is.
Well, and to tie this in a smidgen of a statistic as well is, introducing or coming more into the mainstream are transgender and non-binary folks, which I know that this LGBTQ was done in a session prior, but just as a reminder, trans folks include non-binary folks because it's most of the time, because it's a different gender than what was assigned at birth. And that folks is growing in population. It's currently sitting at about 8% of our population, but 1 in 5 Gen Z, which is the Zoomers coming up who are about to come into spending power money, 1 in 5 identify as LGBT. So recognizing that language around consumers also needs to be opening up, not just to kind of women in your minds from 1950s, but women plus. And those folks, when you talk about dollars, they're not just dollars, they're loyal dollars.
Yeah.
And they're loud about their dollars, and do their research beforehand to make sure that the money that they're spending are for people doing DEI work. So keeping in mind that the trans community is also making up more into this women part of that spending and buying power.
Yeah. And just to add one more thing to that is when we were looking for advertising from the auto companies, and their idea of appealing to the feminine was to make the cup holder pink or to add something pink. And it was always, this is what's going to attract the feminine to our cars. We go, no, that's not going to do it. I'm sorry, that's not going to do it. So there's that thought too, that it has to be something specific in order for feminines to be attracted to it. And that's just crazy.
If only it were as easy as just some pink cup holders.
Yeah. Really. And women love football. I mean, the Browns years ago, they had a football 101 for women. And it was packed because women, just because you're a woman doesn't mean you don't like sports,
Yeah.
and especially football. So yeah, it's a cultural change we're working on here.
Yep. Well, Barbara, you are the master of perfect segues into the next question I'm about to ask. So I don't know how you're doing it, but I'm going to hire you to just follow me around for everything I do and be my segue master, because we're moving into culture. So the next topic I kind of want to get into is, what do small businesses need to know about conducting business with this community, and what's important to them from a cultural perspective? So what is important to women sort of culturally, familially, in their just sort of everyday lives that a small business could be thinking about, and sort of using that and knowing what's important to them in order to market to them, in order to be able to conduct business with them, to encourage them to want to do business with their organization from that cultural perspective. So Danny, why don't you kick us off with this one?
I think ultimately what folks need to do when it comes about culturally engaging with women are to make sure that it's not performative allyship, that they're really have policies in place and are doing active work that's visible to uplift and engage that community. So that can be anywhere from ensuring that language around marketing is not targeted at men. Again, we all know that you can get into social media and you can just narrow down your targeted marketing. Make sure that you're targeting the right group and that you're using adequate language around that. Recognize what's valuable and important to the women in your community. Is it that their time is important, that you recognize that they have multiple priorities, make it easy for them. Those are all easy ways to talk about culturally looking at that and looking at them as equal, powerful individuals, and not back to these microaggressions that, like Barb mentioned, that they're only good for motherhood, that they're only good for taxi service for friends. Really looking at those ways and tying it to it's not just pink cup holders that they're looking for. They're looking for things ultimately, and I'm broad stroke here, looking to make sure that they have a place of belonging, that they're not going to be judged when they come into your business or take out services on you, that they're not going to be asked questions about, is your husband going to be home? To not even assume all those, starting from a foundation that they themselves are their own individuals with all of the power and importance of any other customer walking in your door.
All right. Barbara, let's go to you.
We need to be respected wherever you're shopping, wherever you're going, whatever business you need to be respected just as a person, not a feminine person or a masculine person, but just as a person. We need to be treated with respect. And there's some men that don't know anything about cars, or they may, and believe it or not, there are some men that don't know anything about football. So because they're not interested in it, it's not something so those aren't assumptions we should be making. Everybody should be treated with respect, no matter who it is that's walking in the door or wants to do business with you. A lot of times our business is over the phone. So, that gives you an additional handicap because you don't even know who you're talking to and, what their situation is. But I think it just comes down to, you use the word value, to value that person, whoever they are, and just treat them with respect and not assume that they just are ignorant or, have to be handled differently.
Yeah. My husband is a 6'2" lumberjack who is the least handy person I've ever met. But every time we're in a Home Depot, boy, everybody in that store wants to ask him about, what to do with a 2x4, and he does not know. So yes, making those assumptions is definitely something
true.
you should keep in mind. All right, Cindy, let's go over to you.
At Heinen's, we talk about creating the Heinen's mystique in our stores. And what that means is that we want customers and associates, frankly, to feel better when they leave than when they came in. And that applies to everybody, regardless, right? And so it's that respect factor that Barbara talked about. And, wanting to make sure that everyone has a positive experience, whatever that is. And I think above all else, that really translates into kindness. If you really want to boil it down, it's really about kindness and being respectful. And so we try to focus on it from that perspective, from a customer service perspective, and making sure that everyone experiences the same feeling when they're in our locations. That also translates to our employees, right? And so we have core values here. We have two core values here: honesty and respect. And respect is one of the biggest ones. And so that kind of all flows together. And for us, we want to have associates who love working at Heinen's so that they can translate that mystique to our customers.
All right. Well, thank y'all for your amazing perspective so far. I'm just loving this conversation. And the good news is, many of these questions I was planning to ask you, y'all are just, you're targeting without me even having to ask. So you're making my job very easy this morning. All right, so let's talk a little bit about kind of public displays of inclusivity on behalf of businesses. So some of the questions that we've gotten at the chamber or just in general and throughout this series is we have small business owners or people who are working for small businesses, small organizations, who may have personal beliefs surrounding diversity, equity, belonging, wanting to be inclusive, create inclusive environments, et cetera. But they worry that translating that into their business environment can be seen as a political statement and, you know, has the potential to alienate customers, lose sales, et cetera. So I'm thinking about the way that they engage on social media or types of things that they're posting or putting out there in their online presence. It could be, you know, do I hang a pride flag at my business if they have a brick and mortar, different things like that. So what kind of advice would you give to a business or a nonprofit who has that worry about, you know, the idea of diversity, inclusion, you know, belonging, inclusivity being seen as a political statement? What would you say to them? So Danny, why don't we start with you on this one?
I kind of was hoping that you would. So I will speak as frankly as I can, but with care, recognizing that businesses have a business to run. Yeah, it's political. It all is. Everything that we do can be tied back to some politics, ultimately. And at the end of the day, just like I'm teaching my 7-year-olds, taking no action is action. And so if you have those beliefs, recognize that there is a way that you can navigate it and recognize that there is an outcome for it. I can't walk down the street without being politicized because I'm a non-binary lesbian with a non-binary kiddo living in rural Ohio. But recognizing that if I feel safe in a place, if there is that pride flag hung at your brick and mortar, or if in your marketing, you are inclusive with photos that are not tokenized, let me be really clear, not tokenized photos, but true photos engaging in saying that my family belongs at a place, you've got my dollars and you've got my support. Not only that, I'm now sharing that with my networks. So for those who are worried about the political nature, not taking an action is also a political move. And recognize that at the end of the day, you as a business owner and nonprofit get to choose what that is. And that generally, again, broad stroke, for every dollar you may lose for the folks who are not enjoying whatever political action you're taking, you will get, because we've already talked about the nature of the buying power of some of these other folks will come and support that. Because that's the nature of belonging. If you can bring them in, you'll be supported by those folks looking for that place. And so I firmly believe that we're entering into a space politically and economically that we no longer cannot take a stand, that every action that we take will be politicized. And you just have the power as to how is that politicized.
Barbara, let's go over to you.
Wow, I grew up during the civil rights movement, and we're still fighting that today. And to go back to culture, this is a tough culture in America. We've never been accepting. We didn't accept the original immigrants that came here from Italy and from Ireland. I mean, this is just the way our culture has been. So this is really a push for our culture, because we're still fighting things that we were fighting in the 60s, and here we are still fighting them again. So I think it's going to be a long journey. I think our values have to drive us. And you're right, everything you say or do becomes politicized. But it starts with our values, and it starts at the top. So of any organization, of course, I have a small organization, so I don't have a top, I have a level. We're all at the same level, so we don't have anybody at the top. But the values, like what Heinens is talking about, the values begin at the top, and then they filter down to everybody. So that everybody, and to go back to kindness and to go back to respect, if you treat everybody that way, I think they'll recognize, and you're right about the marketing, it's a different way of using words. It's a different way of being sensitive and empathetic to other people, whether they have disabilities or they're not like you or they don't look like you. But it's going to be a long road. It's going to be a long journey for all of us in this path, because we've been fighting it for a very long time, just on different battlegrounds.
Yeah. I saw something recently that this is sort of the first generation where my daughter has less rights than I did when, you know, I was her age, which is very, very scary. It's very, very uncommon to see you actually have rights relinquished.
Yeah.
And so we saw that obviously with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and you know, it's a scary time for women in that regard. So
Yes, it
Cindy,
is.
let's go over to you.
I definitely don't have a lot to add. I think Danny and Barbara have said exactly the right things. The only thing I would just reiterate is that silence is deafening, right? And so, you know, this is an area where I've had to learn to work on myself. I don't think this is natural for everybody. And I guess my message would be that's okay. But we all have to get comfortable with saying something. Because if we don't, it won't change.
All right. Well, thank y'all. Let's go ahead and move into our next topic I want to touch on here, which is talent attraction and talent retention. So a lot of, you know, businesses, small and large, are obviously facing the issue right now of talent, not only finding it, but retaining it. And I think a lot of companies, whether they're small or whether they're big, are trying to put more of a focus on bringing a more diverse group of people to the work environment, because more and more people are starting to see not only the social benefits, but the financial benefits of having those different perspectives around the table. So as we start to think about businesses who are looking to attract folks to job positions they may have, and this could, again, be a company with 5 employees or 5,000, what are some of the ways that businesses can sort of proactively recruit a more diverse set of candidates? So how can that business sort of put their business, their job openings, et cetera, how can they put themselves where some more diverse folks are, as opposed to what a lot of businesses do, which I think is throw job descriptions out into the atmosphere. They throw it on Indeed, they throw it on LinkedIn, and they just magically hope that diverse people will apply. How can they be more proactive about those recruiting efforts? So Cindy, I'm going to go ahead and start with you on this one.
Sure. So, you know, this is obviously a big part of my day. And I think, you know, a couple of things, you know, particularly in Cleveland, you need to find partners in the community. There are plenty of organizations that are focused on helping people find work in all of our various communities, and you need to find those partners and start collaborating with them. You know, for example, we've done some great work in collaborating with the Spanish American Committee and bringing many more Hispanics and Latinos to Heinens. We try to focus on some of the different job fairs or job events that these organizations are holding that are specifically for, you know, diverse individuals. And you have to be proactive. Today, putting a job posting out on, you know, LinkedIn or Indeed isn't going to bring you much in general, right? Let alone if you're targeting diversity and inclusion in your workforce. And so you have to find those partners and be proactive about the relationships. They exist, they're out there, and they're, you know, willing and able to work with you and be helpful. And the people that live and work in those communities are using those organizations for themselves. And so that's really the biggest piece of advice that I can give. I think, you know, you have to find the right organization and connect with their members or constituents. What I will also say is that you also have to have a workforce that reflects that, right? Now, I know we all have to start somewhere, and I get that, but over time, that will become an easier journey for you. People want to come to work and be themselves. They should, and they want to and should come to work and be with others who are like them, whatever that means, right? Doesn't mean every single person has to be like them, but they have to be able to see others that are like them and in whatever way. And so the more that you're partnering with those organizations and bringing different types of people in, the more that people will become open to joining your company and seeing that there are other people that are like them and being a part of that. So you have to be steady and consistent because that will, you know, pay off in the long run. The last thing I will mention is that we all have employees that already work for us, right? And so we have a great, you know, referral program here. I've seen this at other companies where I've been. It's not a highly unique thing, but it works. And if you are specifically trying to increase the diversity of your workforce, you can specifically ask some of your diverse associates, hey, how do we target this? Is there anyone we have this great referral program. They earn money, you earn money, right? So those small things can help as well generate, more interest.
Okay. Barbara, let's go over to you. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the amazing work of NAWBO.
Well, one of the things that we are doing now as part of our trying to change our culture is I met with Janice Contreras of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. We had a meeting with them. We want to make them aware of NAWBO because a lot of them don't even know about NAWBO. That's our primary concern right now, just make them aware of it. I'm having lunch with Amanda Cole of Plexus. She's the executive director of Plexus, which is the LGBT community in Cleveland. And we're going to talk about the same thing. So they know what NAWBO is. So they know that business owners are welcome and that NAWBO is an inclusive organization. It's an introduction. We're not trying to recruit staff members or anything like that at this point, but to make them aware of who we are, that we have business owners who may be hiring. Maybe they have business owners that want to be a part of NAWBO and to join us. So it's a lot about awareness, but I agree with you. The collaboration and the partnerships with local organizations is the best way to do any of this because we all are working in the same direction and we can all help each other by collaborating with it.
All right, Danny, you want to wrap it up for us?
I will. I don't have much to add. I think Cindy touched on the main piece that I wanted, which I'm a firm believer in. Your recruitment becomes itself if you can retain your people the right way. Like your retainment strategy becomes your recruitment strategy, because if you can foster and develop the culture that you're seeking, they will come find you, because folks who are from marginalized communities are looking for belonging, and so they will find you. I think how that happens is a myriad of ways. But again, having those conversations with your staff. When we're talking about attracting, especially women, looking at whether or not, and still within our culture, women are the primary caregiver. So if you have your shift that is from, 9 until 5, you're not communicating to a large portion who need to work within the home or who need to be able to get their kid off the bus, and recognizing that they still have values and skills. And is there a way that you can communicate that working families are welcome here? Are there ways that you can attract different benefit packages where maybe there's on-site daycare or a co-op daycare? Just because recognizing that we're still in the middle of this culture shift, women are still the primary caregiver, not of just children, but of elderly, aging parents. And so recognizing that that primary perspective has to at least be provided. Additionally, talking about, and this maybe keys into additional diversity, equity, and inclusion belongings. We're currently heavily Christian-based in terms of time off, but recognizing that there's a myriad of religions out there, and are you providing proactively space for people to be able to celebrate different faiths or be able to do something that is not traditionally within what your primary set is? Are you taking into account a Latino family who is celebrating Dia de Muertos, but then you're asking one of them to fly to, a seminar, thinking that we wouldn't do that on Thanksgiving, or New Year's Eve, so thinking about those things are ways that internally, as you create retainment policies, that again will attract new retention to come in and find you.
Yeah. I don't know if anybody has seen the story that's been circulating on Facebook. It keeps showing it to me and I just cry every time. But there was a woman working at a senior living facility who was having trouble. She had a new baby and was having trouble with childcare. And they said, you know what, just start bringing your baby to work. And these seniors in this facility just basically were taking care of her baby, and they loved it because it gave them sort of a sense of purpose, and everybody was just loving having this baby around, and she was able to come to work and, do her job. And I just thought that was so creative of that business to think about, non-traditional ways that you could, work around somebody's family situation. And it ended up being just an incredibly positive experience for everyone at that organization. So I think you're right, Danny, that there, you can get creative sometimes with some of those things.
I think examples like that really showed up during the pandemic,
Mhm.
right? You know, in my world, people weren't working from home. You can't work, you know, sell deli meat, right, from home. You can't work in our warehouse from home. You can't work in our food production plant from home. And it really showed up because they had the need to be home, you know, when their kids were home during doing virtual learning, and their daycare centers were closed, and the employers really needed to do different things to accommodate people, to allow them to continue working and earning money, but also managing their home life. And so I think as employers, we have to be incredibly flexible. We have to respect that people need that flexibility to live, right? We don't all have jobs that can be done from home. We don't all have jobs that can be done, you know, from anywhere. And how can we build in that flexibility for people who need to be on site doing their work, so that they can continue on? And I think we all know, we've seen the numbers. This absolutely played out for the Women Plus community much more than it did for, you know, the masculine community, right? And I think we need to, you know, even though we're functioning in the pandemic in a different way now, we need to continue some of those learnings that we had, and look at how we're doing things, because the needs haven't really changed.
And ultimately, to this point, your competitors are going to do it, and they're going to get that workforce. And that was one thing that we talked about here with the workforce development piece of, if you're not doing it, somebody is, and you're going to lose that workforce and that talent somewhere else.
All right, so as we start to wind down here, I just have a couple more things I want to touch on before we wrap up today. And Danny, you talked about this earlier, but I want to expand on it a little bit. So what are some examples of effective allyship versus performative allyship that businesses can utilize to connect with the Women Plus community? And maybe you could even speak to a little bit about what exactly that means. So since you mentioned this earlier, I'm going to start with you.
So performative allyship versus authentic and impactful allyship usually comes down to who is impacted by the action. And so, you know, we've all gone through a racial reckoning over the last 2 years as well. And there was that one really great time of social media where we all put a Black profile picture. And that made us feel really good, like we were part of something, but it didn't do anything to impact the actual group that we were hoping to. And so that was performative allyship, versus maybe something that would have been different would be contributing to a nonprofit who is uplifting folks who have been displaced or who have had police violence. So those are one quick how you can tell who the impact is of that action. So when you're talking about a Women's Plus, you know, I've already talked a little bit about, you know, in your marketing or in your language of making sure that you are not tokenizing, which means, you know, taking the one person in your organization and making them the poster child essentially for the fact that you welcome women. But truly integrating some of those components we've talked about into your policies, into your actions, and how you navigate your business. One thing, if you're talking about the Women Plus and specifically the Plus, the thing that I always look for are, if you have single-use restrooms and they're gendered, you are right then making action to exclude Plus community, especially if they're single-use restrooms. Make single-use restrooms all gender and put a changing table in both. That way there's no assumption as to who is taking care of a child or as to what bathroom somebody has to use. Those, I can tell you right now, all of the businesses in my area who has a single-use restroom that is all gender. And that is a quick, easy way, because if it's single use, it's locked. And there's no concern about bathroom policies that some people want to get down in the weeds about. Things like that are real authentic allyship to create a space for people to belong. Making sure that, you know, when you're talking to your customers or to your staff, that you're using inclusive language like folks, friends, colleagues, rather than, hey, ladies and gentlemen, guys and gals, girls and boys. Like, just remove all of that and call them what they truly are. Those are ways that you can have true authentic allyship rather than performative allyship. It's not enough to hang that pride flag outside if in your policies you have you don't have things like family leave, but you only have maternal leave. Those are real impactful ways that you can welcome the entire community.
Okay. Barbara, let's go over to you.
No, thank you, Danny, because I didn't even think about that. So often when we're starting a conference or a meeting. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, this is just what we've always said, not realizing the impact of what those words might mean to someone. So I don't have anything to add, but I really appreciate the education that I'm getting from this. So thank you very much. That's really something that is subtle and that I did not even realize. Thank you.
I think all of these panels, our panelists have come away more educated than some of our attendees. These they keep saying, which is great. We're all learning,
Yeah.
right? You know.
Yeah.
Cindy, let's go over to you. Have anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, Danny said it very well. I don't know that I could add any better to that.
All right, awesome. Well, I want to just wrap up today on kind of one final question here, which is more of a general one, but how does a focus on diversity, a focus on inclusion, how does it make business better? Just holistically. So Cindy, why don't we start with you to kind of wrap up for us?
Sure. So I always come from the perspective of, happy employees translate to happy customers, which translates to better business. And so that's the perspective that I'm at. It's all about employees who love working where they are. And I think that translates into better work, better retention. We've talked about a little bit here, and that translates into the customer base. And I think if more employers focused on starting with happy employees, they'd be in a very different place from a business perspective, but they'd also be their associates, their employees would be in a better place every day as well.
Barbara, let's go over to you.
One of the diversities that we focus on is age. So it's everything else that we're talking about, but it's also about age. Obviously, if you do the math, I grew up in civil rights movements in the early 60s and during the 60s. So you can do the math. So I'm not one of those millennials or Gen Zs or any of that. I don't even have a name. I'm from the greatest generation. So we have experience and we have wisdom, but we want those young people to be part of our organization because they have a different perspective. They grew up differently than I did. They were educated differently than I was. So we love to have that different perspective. So I think when we're talking about diversity is all of this plus, don't think because a young woman and because she's young that she isn't good. She doesn't have success. She can't help you just because she's young, or because those of us who are older that we should give it up and we should retire and quietly go away. Well, it's not going to happen because we're never going to be quiet because we still have things that we can contribute, and especially to a culture and a movement like this that we're working on. So we're here to stay. But I think age is important also to not treat the older and the younger any differently.
All right, Danny, you want to wrap it up for us?
Sure. I am a firm believer that a rising tide raises all boats. And so if you can focus on folks who are usually not at a table or a voice who's missing and bring them in, it doesn't just lift their voice or their experience or their expertise. It lifts everyone and it shows everyone that there's a place for them at an organization. It reaffirms that to even the most privileged quintessential person within your organization. It tells everyone that they belong. And not just within your organization, but your customers too. And so if you can focus on small sections and bring them up, small sections, sorry, I should clarify that word. It raises your entire customer base or your entire employment base. And so, and that you could go down rabbit holes as to how that benefits your finances.
All right. Well, I want to thank all of our amazing panelists for their perspective this morning on this very important, topic, this information. I think y'all did an amazing job of wrapping up this series for us. I'm excited to have had all of you. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up today. So to Barbara, to Danny, to Cindy, thank you all for your time. To those who are live streaming for us and participating as individuals, thank you for being here this morning. We will make sure that today's recording is available in addition to the rest of the series so that folks, if they want to go back and rewatch something, they are able to do so. I want to give one last shout out to BW and to Cuyahoga Community College. Thank you so much for your support of this series. And again, thank you to our panelists and to our attendees today. I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of your week and have a happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.